Stop for 1 second and ask yourself a dangerous question. Does it feel like you are running faster just to stay in the same place? Does it feel like every salary raise, every bonus, every small financial victory is immediately consumed by a hidden force, a phantom expense that eats your savings from the inside? If you are a hard-working person, paying your bills, trying to save for a house or your children's education, you are constantly battling an enemy that has no face, no name, and never sends you a formal tax bill. That enemy is inflation. And the greatest deception of modern economics is the lie that inflation is a natural, unavoidable byproduct of a growing economy. We are taught that inflation is an accident, a glitch, a symptom of bad luck or supply chain woes. But what if the opposite were true? What if the steady, corrosive erosion of your purchasing power is not a flaw in the system, but its most critical feature? What if inflation is, and always has been, a deliberate tool, a surgical instrument designed to silently and efficiently transfer your wealth to the financial elite and the governing powers? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is economic history, and once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee the trap. To understand the modern trick, we must trace its lineage back to its brutal origin, thousands of years ago. We must go back to the age when money was real, not just a promise, ancient Rome. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy, the stable currency that underpinned the greatest empire the West had ever known, was the silver denarius. Minted in the 2nd century before Christ, this coin was nearly pure silver, trusted by soldiers on the frontiers, by merchants in Alexandria, and by every family storing its wealth. The value of Rome's money was directly linked to its metallic content, to its reality. But running an empire is monumentally expensive. Armies had to be paid to defend an ever-expanding border, massive public works needed to be funded, and the constant expenses of imperial administration always strained the treasury. By the 2nd century after Christ, the empire faced a crisis. Tax revenues simply couldn't keep pace with the exploding military costs. The emperors, facing the politically suicidal choice of raising taxes on the citizenry, turned to a different solution. They chose the silent tax, currency debasement. The debasement of the denarius is the most damning case study in all of financial history, and it is the blueprint for every modern inflationary event. Instead of honest taxation, emperors began reducing the actual silver content in the coins. The coin still looked like a denarius, still carried the emperor's face, and still had the same nominal value, but its intrinsic value, the wealth it truly represented, had been secretly stolen. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius was about 95% silver. By the reign of Caracalla, in the early 3rd century, it was 50%. By the mid-3rd century, it contained less than 5% silver, a bronze disc thinly washed with silver paint. This wasn't an accident, it was a conscious policy choice. It allowed the Roman government to spend twice, 10 times, 20 times the amount of money without actually possessing the real wealth to back it up. They created an illusion of prosperity to finance their power. The consequences were catastrophic, not for the elites, but for the ordinary citizens. Prices immediately skyrocketed because money was no longer anchored to real value. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. The savings of common soldiers and merchants held in these supposedly stable coins evaporated. Workers demanded higher wages, leading to a desperate wage price spiral that tore the economy apart. Merchants, facing a currency they could no longer trust, resorted to barter or demanded payments in gold, the one asset the government could not easily manipulate. The debasement of the currency didn't just ruin the economy. It destroyed the very fabric of Roman society by eroding trust and stability. It created a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. The more the people lost faith, the more the emperors printed cheaper coins, hoping volume would replace value. This financial cancer was not a mere contribution to the fall of Rome. It was the corrosive killer that rotted the empire from the inside out. The core lesson here, the lesson that serves as the foundation for the entire modern financial system, is this. Inflation is a wealth transfer mechanism. It is a stealth operation. The government, by inflating the money supply, is essentially issuing a tax without legislative approval. They are transferring wealth from those who hold the money, the savers, the workers, the retirees, to the first recipients of the new printed money, the government itself, the banks, the large financial institutions. In Rome, the wealth was transferred from the farmers and soldiers to the imperial coffers. In the modern English-speaking world, the same transfer is happening right now, just dressed up in the complex language of quantitative easing and deficit spending. The currency debasement that destroyed Rome is identical in function to the monetary expansion of the 21st century. The only difference is the physical medium. Copper coated in silver paint has been replaced by digits on a screen and promises from a central bank. This is the oldest, simplest, and most powerful trick of all, and it is the key to understanding why you are constantly struggling to get ahead. When you see inflation as policy, not accident, the entire financial world snaps into focus. The next step is to understand how the English-speaking empires refined this brutal Roman trick into the sophisticated, globalized system that now controls your future. The Roman precedent proves that inflation is an imperial tool, but it took the genius and brutality of the English-speaking financial powers to transform this ancient trick into a permanent, globalized system. For centuries after Rome's collapse, money remained tethered, usually to a metal like gold or silver, which imposed discipline on kings and limited their power to wage endless wars. This restraint meant that governments had to choose between political safety, not raising taxes, and financial solvency, not spending money they didn't have. This uncomfortable balance ended in the 17th century, and the location of the change was London. When the Bank of England was created in 1694, it wasn't founded as a charitable organization to stabilize markets. It was founded because the English government desperately needed money to fight its perennial wars against France. The mechanism was elegant, ruthless, and revolutionary. Wealthy investors bought government bonds, and in return, the Crown guaranteed interest payments, which were funded by taxes levied on the general population. This was the birth of the modern wealth transfer system. The wealthy lent money to the state and received secure, guaranteed interest. The ordinary people, the laborers, the artisans, the farmers, paid higher taxes on common goods like salt, beer, and cloth to fund those interest payments. It created a permanent self-sustaining machine. The elite funded the state and were rewarded handsomely, and the masses carried the burden of the interest payments. Debt became institutionalized, and the Bank of England became the indispensable partner to the Crown, allowing it to finance wars, expand its colonial empire, and exert global influence in ways that kings restrained by a finite treasury could never have dreamed of. The financial center of the world became the city of London, where the control of this debt was centralized. The trick was no longer just debasing a coin, it was creating a system where the very engine of state power was financed by the steady, quiet draining of wealth from the tax-paying public, all dressed up as national finance. The next and most critical stage of this financial evolution, the one that defined your present reality, came in the early 20th century. World War I was not just a conflict of trenches and artillery, it was the ultimate financial war. Every major power, including Britain, entered the war believing it would be quick and could be paid for with gold. Within weeks, that illusion collapsed. The war was consuming capital faster than any government could imagine. The math was merciless, and the gold reserves would not last. What happened next was the single greatest monetary shift of the modern era. One by one, the major powers abandoned the gold standard. They quietly admitted to their citizens that money was no longer a claim on physical metal. It was now nothing more than a promise backed by faith in the state. This was the moment the currency was unshackled from reality, giving governments the total freedom to print, spend and borrow without immediate consequence. Once governments tasted this freedom, they never went back. The final piece of the transfer puzzle was laid down by the United States after World War II. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the US, holding 2/3 of the world's gold, engineered a new global financial system. The US dollar became the new anchor, pegged to gold at a fixed rate, and all other major currencies pegged themselves to the dollar. The entire world's financial stability, every nation's debt, every economic calculation now rested on the United States' promise to maintain monetary discipline. This was the high point of the Anglo-American financial empire. But this stability was an illusion, a massive Trojan horse. The United States, facing the mounting costs of the Vietnam War and increasing welfare spending, could not resist the temptation to inflate its currency to finance its global ambitions. In 1971, President Nixon unilaterally closed the gold window, severing the last direct link between the dollar and gold, effectively destroying the Bretton Woods system. This final break transformed inflation from a government option into a core feature of the global financial system. When the gold standard was finally abandoned, it removed the last material restraint on government spending. The money you hold now, the dollars, the pounds, the euros, are fiat currency, backed by nothing more than the decree of the state. This means central banks can create trillions with a keystroke to fund government deficits, bail out politically connected institutions, and stimulate the economy with money that was instantly printed into existence. The price of this monetary freedom is paid entirely by you, the citizen, through the silent, invisible tax of inflation. This is the ultimate refinement of the Roman trick, a globalized, institutionally protected mechanism that ensures when the government spends money it doesn't have, the purchasing power is subtly drained from your savings, your wages, and your future. The system is designed to keep the majority dependent while the wealth transfer moves inevitably upward, concentrating power in the hands of those who control the printing press. The fact that inflation is a deliberate policy choice, not a benign accident, is proven by the mechanism itself. It is the only way a government can fund massive deficits without facing immediate political backlash through open taxation. When a central bank engages in quantitative easing, or when a government spends trillions in deficit funding, that new money is not distributed equally. It flows directly to specific sectors, banks, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, or into asset classes like the stock market and real estate. This is critical. The new money flows to the elites first. They use this money to buy assets before the prices of those assets have had a chance to fully adjust to the increased money supply. By the time this new money trickles down to the general population in the form of wages or stimulus checks, the prices of everything, from housing to food, have already risen significantly. This is known as the Cantillon Effect, a historical observation that reveals the true intended nature of inflation. It is a transfer of wealth from the late recipients of money, the working and middle class, to the early recipients of money, the banking and political class. This perpetual engineered inflation ensures that the value of your labor and savings constantly depreciates, forcing you back onto the treadmill to earn more just to maintain your current standard of living. It is a system built on mandatory dependence. But history, the brutal teacher, also shows us what survives these financial collapses. Every empire, Every financial system eventually succumbs to its own monetary hubris. Whether it was the silver content in the Roman denarius, the gold anchor of Bretton Woods, or the faith in the modern dollar, the collapse always follows the same trajectory: a slow erosion of value followed by a sudden, catastrophic evaporation of trust. The survivors of these collapses, the ones who preserved and even multiplied their wealth, were never the ones who simply trusted the government's promises. They were the ones who doubted first and acted on that doubt. The lessons of history for the English-speaking world, which has itself been the epicenter of this financial evolution, are clear and actionable. First, realize that financial education is resistance. Ignorance of these financial tricks is the most powerful trick of all, as it ensures the public remains passive and easily manipulated. Second, you must build real wealth outside the paper traps. When currency value evaporates, the value of paper promises, like bonds or even cash savings, goes with it. What retains value are tangible assets. This is not about panic, it is about preservation. Historically, the wealth that survived every collapse, from ancient Rome to the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany, was held in assets that governments could not easily create or counterfeit: productive land, durable commodities, productive businesses, and, crucially, real skills. Skills that generate real value. The ability to fix, build, feed, or transport will always command a premium when fiat money fails. The baker who can still provide bread, the artisan who can repair tools, the farmer who can feed the community, these are the individuals who not only survive financial chaos, but thrive in its aftermath. Production, unlike paper money, is never an illusion. The shift in perspective is the ultimate defense. Stop viewing wealth as a bank balance and start viewing it as resilience, knowledge, and ownership of real-world value. The system is designed to crush those who remain passive savers in paper assets. It is designed to reward those who understand that they must trade their depreciating currency for real, tangible value that transcends the political cycle. The cycle of debt build-up, denial, crisis, and societal reset is an immutable law of economic history. The only choice you have is whether you face this cycle blind, assuming the authorities have your best interests at heart, or whether you face it awake, recognizing that the very system is programmed against you. Inflation is not an accident. It is the deliberate price you pay for a government that chooses political safety over financial solvency. It is a silent tax, a hidden trick, a surgical transfer of your life's energy to the top of the pyramid. But once you understand the pattern, once you recognize the ancient blueprint, you are no longer a victim of the system. You become a student of history, prepared to protect your future from the financial tricks that never stop repeating.